Good morning, friends. Hope that this finds everybody well. I am joining you from the chapel of CVST. You can probably notice, but they've redesigned some of the walls, and they've put in very generously many more bookshelves for me. So I'm enjoying the time here, being reunited with some of my Sfarim and books. I wanted to just be true to the offer yesterday. If there were any questions that were left over from yesterday that people wanted to ask, I just wanted to give a minute or so for that now. Robin.
So I totally understand admitting complete hopelessness and helplessness before you can begin the ascent. Makes sense to me. And knowing when you've hit bottom and can't do it on your own is, as they say in French, très important. But it would seem to me that this is not something you do once. Maybe some of us need to do it several times a day, several times a week. Are there reminders to do this, or is it just here in the psalm? It would seem almost like the beginning of a lot of prayer services.
Yeah, no. I think you're 100% right, and maybe we need like reminders, every couple of seconds or every breath. And one of the things that we're going to focus on today is kind of the awareness of how much help we need. None of us can be in this world by ourselves. We're so, as we were talking about before, Shep was saying, we're so interconnected. The sky today is affected by what's happening on the West Coast and all the fires. And so we really do need to recognize kind of this, with a sense of gratitude and humility, how much we receive that's not really merit-based from others and from God. So yeah, I think every prayer starts this way. Hashem sifasai tiftach, right? That God open up my lips. Right, Hashem, we're like, well, we wouldn't be able to move our lips without, and so every prayer kind of recognizes, that God is, that we're opening up our lips for God, but that nothing can happen independent of God. So yeah, the Code of Jewish Law opens up with the statement, Savisi Hashem l'negdi samid, that a person is supposed to kind of live with this awareness of God, the presence of God constantly. There are actually 6 constant commandments. To remember the Exodus of Egypt, to love God, to fear. We're actually supposed to kind of keep this as a baseline kind of track with multiple tracks that are going simultaneously. It's an invitation to kind of expand how much we can think about things simultaneously. But it's a smart group. Very good. Thank you, Robin. Any other questions before we continue? All right, I wanted to start today with a really beautiful and powerful medrash. The medrash teaches that when Moses transcends to kind of the heavenly planes, he sees a huge storage house filled with spiritual goodness. And so Moses asks God, to whom is this for? And God responds, these are for those who toil in learning. And Moses continues on the journey, and he sees another one, and yes, the same question, and God responds, this is for those who are doing acts of kindness. And the medrash continues with all these different storage houses, and finally Moses appears in front of one that has no boundaries. It's like this limitless storage unit. And Moses asks God, to whom is this for? Or what is this filled with? And he said, this is filled with matnas chinam, with free gifts. And one of, I think, the interpretations of the medrash is that if a person approaches any sort of relationship, but certainly with a relationship with God, from a sense of entitlement, from a sense of, I'm owed this. So then there's a conversation of how much are you owed, right? A person goes to their boss and says, listen, I think I deserve a raise. Really? Why do you think you deserve it? And how much? So, right, there's a conversation there that maybe you're meritorious, maybe you're not, but there are going to be limits on that. When a person is approaching the relationship with, actually, you don't owe me anything. So then the response is not merit-based. I've already acknowledged you don't owe me anything. So if you don't owe me anything and I'm not coming from a place of entitlement, there's actually much more, there's an aspect of expansiveness because it's not tied to that. Because then the response is reciprocated with, I'm going to give you something that you may or may not be worthy of. But because it's not coming from a place of worth or merit, it's coming from a benevolent act of giving. So God has limitless opportunities to give. So that's part of the important framing for these two verses. And it's going to, on the simple level, read a little bit in a depressing way, but I don't think that's how it's meant to be understood. So we're going to share this screen here. And we're going to be in Psalms again, Psalms 130 lines or verses 3 and 4. So imavonis tishmar ka Hashem miyamid. God, if you are going to keep accounts of all the sins, who could possibly survive? And then continues, Ki imcha slicha leman tivare. Yours is the power to forgive so that you may be held in awe. If we approach the relationship and the dialogue, really it's a dialectic with God, God, listen, if you're gonna care about sinning, in that, not that you don't care, but that if you're gonna hold that against us, that you're gonna really come have like a sheet of good and bad. As soon as there's something in the column that I shouldn't have done, how can I atone for that? How can I answer that? In the garden, we had one rule. God said, don't eat of this thing. God said, no, we didn't listen, and we got kicked out of the garden. God says, listen, I can't be in a healthy relationship with you if you're not going to respect my boundaries. I told you, no, you didn't listen. It wasn't consensual. It's not a safe space for me. So if you're going to be particular, God, about us not listening to you, not doing your will, it doesn't make a difference if it's 1 or it's 1 billion. Who could possibly survive? It's not capable. So this is not meant to put kind of this encumberment of this yoke of, oh my gosh, I'm a sinner. It's actually just the opposite. That if sinning was going to be something that was going to get in the way of us being in a relationship, then you wouldn't be able to be in a relationship with anybody because everybody sins. But what can I acknowledge in this relationship that can actually bring us closer together? Your ability to be forgiving. That I know that I haven't been perfect. I know I didn't bring my A game every moment. But you have this power to forgive. And why do you forgive? So that we can appreciate what power looks like. When a person uses power for the ultimate good, for something that's better than just self and perhaps being particular of what a person feels they're entitled to. So then that's a godly character trait. And it's something, the word in Hebrew for fear, we say zira, yiras Hashem, yiras Shemayim. But the word yira really means to see, to perceive. Rabbi Tzaddik says this, Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen dies, I think, in 1901. The idea of really fearing God is being in awe of God, of having an awareness of God's goodness. A person is in a relationship with God where they really appreciate how good God is. The motivation is not out of fear of punishment, it's out of love. It's out of a certain anxiety, I don't want to disappoint. So I want to share this is an original idea, but in my head it's very connected. In the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. So you'll notice here in the Mishnayos, there's 6 different orders. The one for damages, Nezikin, is where we find Pirkei Avos. And the rabbis, right, this is all about if you have an ox in it, or somebody's cow, right, who pays? The reason why Pirkei Avos ethics is found in here is because the Torah doesn't actually prohibit doing damage. The Torah speaks to the consequences of that damage. If I break your window with my baseball, I have to pay to replace the window. But what happens if I say, okay, I have plenty of money, I'll break your window and then I'll pay for it, I'll replace it? The Torah doesn't explicitly prohibit that. The rabbis point out it's prohibited through the positive commandment of loving your neighbor like you love yourself. You have to, just like you wouldn't have to deal with this, somebody else shouldn't have to do it either. So in Pirkei Avos, in ethics, we find in the 2nd chapter, it should be the 13th Mishnah, a teaching from Reb Shimon. He quotes a pasuk, a verse from Joel, and this is, in its entirety, this is an amazing verse. But Rabbi Shimon says, "Have a zahir b'kriyas shema b'tefillah." A person should be careful, be particular with saying the Shema and with prayer. Kisha'atam ispal, that when a person prays, al ta'aseh tefillascha keva. Don't make your prayer fixed or rigid, performative. Ella rather rachamim v'sachanunim lifnei hamakim. A person should. The word here is mercy, rachamim. A person should be in a merciful state, and this is our word, tachanunim, the same as chen. We're seeing it's also related to the word chinam, but it's also the same word as vaschanon, this prayer that we mentioned yesterday, the name of this week's Torah portion. Lifnei hamakom, the omnipresent. And how do you know? In speaking about God, God is compassionate, God is forgiving, God is slow to anger, God has an abundance of kindness, God is consoling and kind of healing on the evil, on the bad. And what it reads as a non sequitur, and don't be wicked in your own esteem. Don't see yourself as being wicked. Ostensibly, these things have nothing to do with each other, except for the person who said it, Reb Shimon. But if we look at the actual verse in Yoel, I think it's 2:3. It's a fantastic verse. Maybe it's not 2:3. The prophet says, here it is, it's 2:13. In my head it was 2:3, it's 2:13. V'kiru levavchem. This is such a beautiful verse of the prophet. Rend your hearts rather than your garments. So here on Tisha B'Av, when a person, God forbid, loses we mourn, wear sackcloth. Historically, when a person loses a family member, they tear one's garments. So instead of tearing, says the prophet, rather tear your heart and don't tear your garments. Return to God. And this is the proof text that the Mishnah says, Ki chanun v'rachum hu erech hapayim v'rav chesed v'nichem al hara'ah. So in the Mishnah, this is the second part that's quoted, but this is the first part, right? Which is the heart is always associated with prayer. The first Mishnah says that there's three things that the world rests on: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. Avodah, service. Now the Gemara in Tainus at the beginning says it's service of the heart. Service of the heart is prayer. So when a person appreciates God's goodness, there's no space to see yourself as being evil. There's no space for that. It's a false identity. There's no such thing. Because evil speaks to a permanent identity. This is who I am. It speaks to a classification, a qualification. It's just not true. A person wants to come close to God, God's there. So a person who sees himself as evil is somebody who doesn't acknowledge the invitation from God to come closer. And so what God is saying is like, I'm not interested in your mourning. I'm not interested in you being sad. I'm not interested in you being depressed. What I want you to do is get into that heart space. What I want from you is to kind of open yourself up, be vulnerable, acknowledge who you are and where you are, and know that I'm meeting you in that space. This is kind of the big curse that God gives to the snake. I can't imagine it's pleasant to eat dirt, but the mystics explain that when when God says to the snake, your food will be on the ground, right? What that means is you will have access to your own sustenance wherever you are. So don't ever come to me asking for anything. I don't want to have what to do with you. That's the biggest curse that God can give. I'm cutting you off. I'm not punishing you. I'm going to give you abundance, but I'm not interested in being in a relationship with you. By contrast, when we think about supplication, when we think about being in a healthy relationship with God, there's a recognition that the system is one that supports us failing. Because when we think about what failing looks like, failing within the Jewish tradition is giving up. Hopelessness. Hopelessness is the ultimate curse. In the 19th blessing of the Shemona Esrei, it says, V'la malshinim al tehi sikva, that the curse that the rabbis at the time gave to those who were in opposition is that they should have no hope. It's the biggest source of impurity, because if we believe that God is all powerful, how is there space to be hopeless? Nothing's difficult for God. When we think about the choices that we've made in the past that perhaps have distanced us from God, they don't at all define or limit how close we can come to God in the future. And so by saying, God, listen, if a sin, which again, we can all define in our own way, if making poor choices, if not taking this seriously, if failing in our own minds, is something that is inhibits us from coming close, so then nobody can come close. And now that we've gotten that out of the way, know that I appreciate the ask of forgiveness. I appreciate what that means to be forgiven. And I want to show up asking for that, not because I'm worthy and not because I'm entitled, but because I appreciate how great you are. And that greatness is manifested in your capacity to forgive. And I'm asking you to forgive so that we can become close and kind of reunited. I want to pause because I saw there were some hands, and I also want to throw into the chat a beautiful, this is an article where I quote on forgiveness on part of this series on Rend, of grace. In there's a beautiful parable that I quote from the Zera Kodesh. The Zera Kodesh was one of the early Hasidic masters. And he is explaining when we ask for forgiveness in the Shemona Esrei, in the major prayer, it says, we use this word Rav. Yeah, I can talk about that. That when we ask for forgiveness, we say that God has like abundance, uses this word Rav, has this kind of this kind of expansive overabundance of forgiveness. And the Zera Kodesh gives a parable of why that's necessary. With this, again, this parable of a window. He says that there's this poor person who breaks the window of a king. And so he feels bad. And so he goes to replace it. So he goes to the local place. He picks up a window and he brings it to the king. And he says, listen, I was upset. I broke your window, but I'm sorry. Here's a replacement. So the king says, listen, I really appreciate it. I'm sorry that you were upset with me. I appreciate the replacement. And I forgive you. But I would really like to show you the window that you broke, how it was made, and what is going to go into it being replaced. And so he shows that there was this really kind of ornate artisanal piece that required, the most fancy stones and gems from all over the world, and the whole team of people that would, work on the stone piece and work on the glass piece. And it was, stained glass and all sorts of unique and kind of very pricey ways. And it took, dozens of people and weeks of work to finally to be able to recreate what was broken. And the king shows him through this whole process, and he says, but I want you to know that I forgive you. So the person obviously feels horrible that they didn't realize the impact of their actions. And that's really the message that when we think about, certainly in the human interpersonal piece, a person says, listen, I was having a bad day. I said something hurtful. I'm really sorry. When we think about forgiveness, it doesn't take the words back. It doesn't necessarily heal the wound. It doesn't erase the scar. We say that we're sorry, but on some level, it's really superficial. And so when we ask God for forgiveness, it's that extra capacity of God being God that really allows for forgiveness where we haven't undone the brokenness. If we think about being in a healthy relationship with God, where a mitzvah is us doing what God sees as being good for the universe, and a sin being the opposite. So a person says, listen, I'm sorry for starting a wildfire. I realize now it was bad. Saying sorry doesn't change the reality of what happened to the world. So there's an aspect of God's forgiveness, that God can forgive in a way that we cannot. Because when we think about the physical implications of our actions, the window doesn't fix itself because you said you're sorry. Okay, I want to pause because I saw that there were some questions. Ben.
I wonder if you can explain how these two verses comport with the idea of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where a book is taken out and everything is written in it.
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, just to show you, we'll share the screen. There are those that understand this word "me" is actually an allusion. The Ben Yehoyada points out that it's an allusion to Rosh Hashanah and Elul, and that the Yemei, the days of Din. Mi Yamod, it's the day that we're standing in judgment. Yemei meaning the days that we are standing. The Lev Simcha, who's one of the Ger Rebbes, gives a very positive framing of this, that this is actually a claim from the person who's repented. Sorry, this is a claim to God from the person who is observant from birth to the Baal Tshuva, to the one who's repented later in life. The Gemara in Yuma, Pevav 86-ish, says that when a person repents out of love, all of the demerits now become merits. All of the sins now become mitzvahs. Because if a person thinks about all the bad, and again, bad being a very subjective, personal invitation to define what that is, but when a person thinks about all of the missteps and really atones for them and says, you know what, I realized I didn't do enough dishes, right? If it's a personal relationship. The boss, I realized I didn't show up on time, but now I'm really going to take it seriously. So then each of those things that were negative now become the impetus and the motivation for coming even closer and being a better person in the future. So the way that this is parsed is Imavonis Tishmar Ka, that God, if you're going to save all of the mistakes that we've ever made, and then once we've said we're sorry, you're going to move them all on the ledger to the good. So Miyamid. So who could ever engage in a dynamic where we're part of a collective where you have certain people who have 100% of their actions for their entire lives in this positive, right? You can't grave on a curve if a certain percentage of the population all have 100. But the idea is that when we come to Rosh Hashanah, if a person realizes that they're standing in front of the Master of the universe and that God cares about our actions, by being able to really go through everything that we've ever done, we're doing an accounting, not to feel bad that we're like somehow not doing well in life, but to be able to really take ownership for our relationship with God and say, listen, this year, it was a hard year. I didn't get enough sleep. I was stressed. There was a pandemic, all the things were going on. I wasn't as focused as I should have been. Here are the things that I really feel bad for, but I'm not going to do them again, and I'm going to be better. So then that's really what the ask is. The ask is to be able to acknowledge that God wants to be in relationship with us, and that there's a mechanism to clear the slate, to be able to really kind of have a do-over, not with one that has the continuity of everything in the past, but allows that to provide a lot of momentum moving forward. Just one other way to parse this, Avonis Tishmar Ka, that God, if you're going to kind of present me with all of my actions from the past, so what's the response to that? So there's a way in which you can parse this mi ya'amod, right? That this is a reference to Hill's famous teaching, im einan nili mili. If I will not be for myself, who will be for me? So when a person says, you're right, I did all of these things, I take ownership, but it's not who I am. Who I am is not somebody who's spacing out. Who I am is somebody who has the capacity to pay attention and to be conscious and deliberate and mindful and aware and to do the things. And I know that nobody else can repent for me and nobody else can make the contributions that I'm in this world to do. So the response to what's going to be with all the things that you did, but yeah, me yamay, but I, the person who you say is, that needs to be in this world, that there is no redundancy in the system. There's no one else in the world like me. Each one of us, if I'm not going to be for myself because nobody else is me, that me, literally the me, is what's able to stand and say, but God, right now I'm capable of being in a healthier relationship with you and I want to, I'm committed. So it's meant to be read in a positive way. And there's something also, I think, of comfort in this. In certain communities, we are kind of obsessed with this thought of like, okay, what does God want from me? What does God want from me right now? Right? The verse says, what does God want from us? The verse answers just that we should kind of be able to be aware of God. But I think the deeper teaching is God's interested in being in a relationship, right? The question of what does God want from me? Like, that's a great question. But first, we're supposed to celebrate that the master of the universe, the one thing that was never created, actually cares about me. And not just cares about me that like we shouldn't have wildfires and climate change and human trafficking and all of like the broad horrific things of the world, but actually cares about me like, did I have enough to eat? Did I sleep enough last night? Like what, like the nuance of every aspect of my life. Once I recognize that that's the God that is waiting to be in a relationship with me. So the question of what does God want from me is not some sort of abstract, like theoretical. It's right now I'm in a relationship with the divine. And like right now, the divine is waiting. So what does it look like for me to stand up? What does it look like for me to be present? What does it look like for me to put in the effort that I can? I hope that answered it, Ben, or gave an answer to it. Other questions?
Well, Jack Neiman puts a good question, one I always wondered about in chat. I don't understand the concept that God is slow to anger, that we say over and over. There are so many instances of quick punishment when God is angered. Can you help me with that one?
Sure. God is very slow to anger. If you think about the way in which we are all still here, Parshas Nitzavim starts off after all of the curses of the previous parsha. It says, "Vatem Nitzavim hayom kulchem." You're all standing here. If we think about all the things that we've ever promised God, all of the things that we've committed to, all of the expectations, all of the disappointments, because we're human. I think if we were in a relationship with any person, that we would treat, God the way that we treat the other person. I don't know that the other person would still be in the relationship. Could be I'm wrong on that, but God gives us everything that we have. If a person has that perspective, that this whole world is here, let's take a big step back. When God created the world, literally in the garden before the sin, it was utopia. It was obviously the Garden of Eden. There was no sickness, there was no death, there was no gender differentials. It was absolutely perfect. And God, the Ramchal tells us, created us because God's perfection necessitates God being a giver. That God created us to give to us, to give us pleasure. The Ramchal says the purpose of this world is that God wants to give us the ultimate pleasure. The ultimate pleasure is a spiritual pleasure, not limited by the physical. And so on day one, after all of the creation of all of the investment in creating this world, God is excited. There's finally Adam and Eve. It's not good to be alone because you can't give. And so God created us to be able to give. And just a couple of hours into the project of humanity, we deeply disappoint God. God said no, and we didn't listen. And so God says, listen, you need to figure this out. If you don't know who I am, you don't know who you are, you don't know in this dynamic, like who's the power source, the expectations, you got to figure this out. So God kicked us out to be able to do the work, to recognize who we are in relationship with God, that we're not entitled to anything, that God is benevolent. And I would just say, if you look around the world, I don't know how many people have gotten the memo, right? That we're not here for our own power, we're not here for our own prestige, we're not here for our own kind of selfish indulgence. We're consuming this earth. We're consuming it, we're ravaging it. Every system is broken, it's corrupt. It's people with power wanting more at the expense of those who don't have enough of the basics. So how is it we're still here? If I was God, I would have thrown it out a long time ago. Quoting Tracy Chapman, we need a new beginning, right? Like the world's too broken. It's too broken. So the idea that we were enslaved for 400 years, there's an aspect of God, right? We as God's children, whatever that means, were enslaved for 400 years. And God tolerated that. All of the brokenness that's ever been, God is sensitive to, and God has allowed it to be. So in my mind, there's an unintended consequence of God being slow to anger, which is that horrific things can happen. To say this differently, if God was intolerant of it, there would never be genocide. There never would have been a Holocaust. There would never be children being sick. It's all unjust. It's all unjust. From our perspective, it's all bad. It's all bad. And we wouldn't want to perpetuate that for even 1 second. So I think one way to see it is that we don't necessarily appreciate how painful it is for God to be God and having to be sensitive to the pain of every person's existence at any given moment. Sorry for the long answer. I know there's some other hands up.
Sherry or Simon?
So the word ira, usually in relationship to God, often translated as fear. You mentioned awe, but you also mentioned to see or to look. Can you talk a little bit more about that aspect of it and how that fits?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, a person is driving and they see a cop driving next to them. A healthy person doesn't speed. I would say you should never speed ever, but it takes a certain kind of cognitive dissonance to speed if the cop is right there, because you're aware of the cop and you know there are going to be consequences if you break the law because the cop is watching. So if we really believe and can sense the divine presence with us, how could we ever do anything that we think God doesn't want from us? To say that differently, it's really to the extent that we're willing I want to frame this in the positive. To the extent that we're aware of the divine in the moment, in the presence of God in the room, is to the extent that our actions are influenced by that consciousness. And then you can think about this in if your boss doesn't want you being on Facebook at work, okay, the boss walks into the room. You can't be on Facebook if they're watching, right? Because you know there are going to be consequences, right? So there can be a fear of the consequences, but also there could be my wife Wendy and I have different favorite foods, and we have low-level discomfort with some of the smells of the foods that the other people dislike. So a person who really doesn't want to cause another pain will be sensitive to, like, if you're here, I don't want to do this because it's not fun for you. You like this type of music, I like this type of music. If you're here, I'm not going to blast this type of music. Not because I'm afraid you're going to yell at me or you're going to take, some sort of, vengeance of that, and you're going to blast your music louder and it's going to end poorly. But rather, I don't want to do anything that's going to cause you pain or discomfort. So there's certain things that we know that God hates, right? Oppression. It doesn't even have to be nuanced. So if a person sees that God, right, has this awareness of God, there's a spectrum of motivation from, on one end, a fear of punishment, which our rabbis teach us is like the lowest level of motivation. If a person is in a relationship with somebody and they're motivated because they don't want to get yelled at, it's not a healthy relationship. If a person is motivated by all they want to do is make this person happy, I feel responsible for the happiness, I love them so much, they're so good to me, I'm so grateful. All I want to do is, is give them pleasure and joy and all the things. So that's a great and healthy motivation, and hopefully the other person reciprocates. So when I think about fear of God, I think about it in terms of the more that we understand God, the more God is real, and the more we're able to incorporate the reality of God into our decision-making process.
Thank you.
Linda Solomon, you had a question?
Yes, I do. Would you explain, please, because I'm really not familiar with the chronology of it. Cain kills Abel, but it's Adam and Eve who were thrown out of the Garden of Eden. And I was always under the impression that Cain killed Abel in the Garden of Eden, and yet God took his vengeance out on the parents. And this act of murder was not really punished or accounted for. Could you explain that to me, please?
Sure. Yeah. So in the Genesis narrative, Adam and Eve are thrown out Saturday night. They're created Friday of the 6 days of creation. Midrashim speak about what happened in each hour. It was a busy day. Adam names all of the different animals, looks for a partner, doesn't find one, then has a greater appreciation when he kind of takes a nap. God puts him to this slumber to then kind of split him and create a partner. The Vilna Gaon has a long exposition on why God is the ultimate surgeon, right? God heals. God could have made this in a miraculous way. Why was it necessary to take a nap? But it was very much a human experience from the very beginning, that God wanted that Adam and Eve should be able to see each other in the best way, and even by comparison to the other things that were created. But anyways, they sin Erev Shabbos, and in all of this lies the mysteries of the universe. And I know Harold is here because he was afraid he was going to miss the secrets of the universe. But the Ramchal explains that Adam's original sin was motivated by a desire to show God that he was capable of putting in more effort. That really, from God's perspective, had Adam and Eve just been passive for one day, not eaten from the garden, from the tree, they would have been able to go into the Sabbath as that kind of eternal Sabbath, and that would have been the end of the world as we know it. There would have been a choice, it would have been significant, and they would have been rewarded. And Adam was like, I'm not like in a regular class, I'm in like the AP class. I want to be able to have some sort of degree of difficulty that if the world is balanced and really evil only exists externally, it's not sorry, there's some people doing maintenance. It's not a great enough demonstration of my kind of intention and capacity. Let's rock the boat a little bit. Let's create some sort of deficit. Let's sin. And then I'll show God by putting in the effort to fix it that like I'm deeply committed to this relationship. So it was what's known as an Aveira Lishma, a sin for the sake of heaven. Sorry, if you know the chapel, you know the door is very far away, so I apologize. Hopefully they'll keep it down. But anyways, the mystics explain that Adam could have tapped in to this positive action by taking in the Sabbath early, by creating more holiness, not as a response to the negativity that he himself creates, but proactively just increasing the good. He would have been able to achieve it, taken ownership and responsibility, showed God how much he cares without having broken the world. Give me 1 second, I apologize, let me just close this door. Sorry, it's Saul's class, no problem. I apologize. So it's emblematic of the struggle we have now in social justice. We talk a lot about restorative justice, but it's not really true. We respond and we react. We try to create safe spaces. We try to dismantle unsafe spaces, but it's all reactionary. It's all, there's voter suppression, so we should figure out how do we get people access to vote. But it's not undoing the cause of all the things which are broken. And it all goes back to the garden. And it's one of the reasons why we talk about it all the time, is because that really created a new blueprint for this world, which we're into this space of tikkun olam, of trying to like fix the world, but we're not fixing the world, we're responding to it, right? We're putting out fires, but we're not actually doing anything to prevent them. We're not doing anything to create a different world that doesn't have the brokenness. And so in recognizing our relationship with God and that our choices make a difference, when we say, listen, I'm sorry, right? Have we undone that consequence? So what's unique about repentance and what's unique about what these verses here are saying is that from God's perspective, when we think about the negative implications, the negative consequences of in the spiritual world of our shortcomings with God, when we own them and we say, God, I'm going to use that shortcoming, right, to actually come closer to you, it's not reactionary, but it's restorative. We take that which we broke, and not only do we fix it so that we didn't break it, but we actually improved it. We actually use that which was deficient to now be able to come closer to God. And that's kind of the awe. That's the power of what the verse is speaking to, that when God forgives, right, then it shows God's power. If I get upset here and I break this table, I can tell you a lot of times outside the door, and then Patrice is sitting there, listen, I'm really sorry. Do you have some duct tape, right? But then the table's gonna have, I'm from the South. My car's held together with duct tape. Everything, if something's broken, you put on duct tape. But then you have duct tape everywhere, right? From God's perspective, it's a stronger table. It's a more embellished table. It's a more significant table that was built out of love. It's meaningful because its existence speaks to the process of restoration. Just to see it again in the words. Right? Who could possibly survive? It's not possible. Yours is the power to forgive. When we forgive, we can say, listen, no hard feelings. There's something generous and gracious about that, but it doesn't undo the past. What we're able to see and appreciate, respect, is the awesomeness of God's capacity to actually change the past to a different reality. And that's something that's meant to be empowering to us, that we are very much the masters of our own destiny. The Nefesh Chaim says, Chaim Volozhin, 18th century, educator and theologian, says that when we're created B'Tselem Elokim, one of the implications of being created in the image of that name of God is that Elokim is the creator. So we are also creators. We are creators of universes. We create when we take responsibility and ownership. Yeah.
So, excuse me, Rabbi, but how does that respond to the question of Cain and
Good.
his
Sorry,
murder of his
yeah,
brother?
Sure. Sorry, I was still focusing on the Adam part. Rabbis, some more than others, have struggles of concise speech. So that's all that happened in the garden, and then we were kicked out of the garden, and we've never really come back. The mystics explain by Shavuot, the temple. One of the reasons why we have customs of flowers is that it's actually kind of the Garden of Eden is a plane of sensitivity, of awareness that we maybe are able. It's not geographic. It's a certain sense of awareness of spirituality. Could be we revisited that by the giving of the Tzeiram. But practically, we haven't really returned. When the brother Cain kills Abel, he's banished. He's banished from society and he's labeled a wanderer. But that being banished as a wanderer wasn't from inside of the garden to outside, but rather that he wasn't going to have the protection of community. And in fact, he says, but someone's going to kill me because I'm not going to have, the communal protections. God puts a sign. The mystic says it was a letter. One says it's the letter Vav, the letter Zion on his forehead. But basically for 7 generations, he was going to be protected. And then one of his descendants actually, he gets shot with an arrow, is how he finally dies. But that banishment was a banishment from being in society, and then he needed to be nomadic.
Rabbi, I'm going to bring your attention to the time. We have 3 minutes, and
Yeah.
Jeremy has his hand up, perhaps for one last question.
Yeah, please. And we're going to be together all week.
I just quickly, I'm the journey from fission to fusion, and the repaired table. God likes the repaired table, but it's not really repaired.
Yeah, it's kind of regenerated, right? If we think about kind of a replacement, and that's really that's how the Beis Halevi, that's how the Lev Simcha understands the verse. That one of the ways to understand this is that God, if you're really going to be particular and care about every time we made a poor choice, every time we did something that was hurtful, and you're going to forgive us, and forgive us like in a holistic way, but with a sensitivity to the nuance and the details of each one. How can we stand? How can we be in a relationship? Like there's a struggle here. There's a power dynamic that makes it uncomfortable. Imagine, a person is unfaithful. Imagine a person steals from a company. You do something that like completely undermines the faith of that relationship. For many people, you can't move forward. You can't. I can't be in a relationship anymore. If God says no, I understand. And I see you and I forgive you. And let's say it happens again and again and again and again and again. And finally it clicks with us that like, you know what? I need to change my ways, and we do. And God says, no, I still love you. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I forgive you. I understand. That's an uncomfortable place to be in. I think it's a very uncomfortable. Me, Yamid, how can I, right? I obsessively think about God. Do I get it right? I don't know. I don't know if I'm north of 50%, right? Like, I don't know. I try, but the idea that I know how many times I failed already today, and that I know that God still loves me, there's something uncomfortable about that. There's something uncomfortable that like, you're actually too good. You're too good. Because if I know that you're so good, I know that I don't have to put in so much effort today, because tomorrow I can apologize and you're still going to be there. So part of the struggle in being in a relationship with a source of good in the universe, the ultimate source of good, is to not take advantage of that and to hold both simultaneously the awe of being in the presence of that goodness. You know, the Kohen, I know we're out of time here, we're going to stop because I have to go to this other thing, but we'll start with this tomorrow. The Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur for many years would die because he didn't appreciate the goodness of the holiness of that space. So I would say, like, for today, let's be aware of the holiness of the space. And what does it look like to respect that? To respect and acknowledge the goodness, both to be able to motivate us, but also to keep us in a space of a sensitivity that we shouldn't take it for granted. All right, I'll see everybody tomorrow, and we'll pick up with questions at the very beginning. Thank you, Harold. Kol
Thank
Tuv
you.
Shalom.
Thank you. Bye-bye.